Hello there, and welcome to your Bamboo Chalupa Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Brett Snyder. I am the president of Knucklepuck, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Mr. Nate Shiver, the author of shiverweb.com.
Hello, hello.
So today we are going to do what we're calling a throwdown episode. I first did a throwdown debate back in 2011 when I was working at Sear Interactive in Philly, and I had a debate with Will Reynolds, who's the founder of Sear, about what would be more beneficial for a link building campaign. Should you host the asset on your website, or should you create an external microsite for it? And we found that debate format was really pretty interesting to be able to, since there is no correct answer in SEO, this debate exercise allowed us to consider the different angles and create the best comprehensive plan for being able to push out that link building campaign. We'll actually link to the original Throwdown Thursday link in our show notes, but today we want to use this kind of debate format to talk about resource allocation in SEO. And one of the biggest things that especially people who either manage a team or do your SEO in-house, you have to understand, where do you want to focus your efforts and your resources? Is it on your on-page factors or is it on your off-page factors?
Right. And so we're going to frame this as, again, like a debate throwdown. But here's our scenario to provide some context. So you have a company website and you make some sales online. You have an e-commerce component. But you also do a lot of offline marketing and lead generation, maybe through a manufacturer website, whatnot. Either way, this could be Acme company, any company. But basically, the website, it's technically solid. All your technical SEO elements are in place. And you have a mid-level retainer or kind of a medium amount of resources, a few $1,000s per month. And you can either hire a link builder or content promoter and go all in on off-page SEO, or you can hire a content developer, someone who's really good at writing, someone who's really good at on-page SEO. If you had to choose, what do you spend your resources on?
And our goal here is to help this hypothetical client determine how to allocate her budget to get the most value from SEO. Now, we know that SEO is kind of this, melting pot of different strategies, but at a certain point, you have to prioritize, where am I going to invest my resources?
Right. And I'm going to take the position of on-page SEO.
And I am going to take the stronger position of off-page SEO.
We will see about that. All right. So here's my opening statement for on-page SEO. This is why this company, they should hire a content developer to focus solely on developing content on their website. And that's because the right on-page strategies are the most sustainable strategies. And just to pull in a sports analogy from baseball, in baseball, there's this concept of playing small ball versus hitting home run. And that's the idea where when you're a hitter, and you go up to the plate trying to get a hit. You're just trying to get on base. You're just trying to get to first base in hopes that the next batter will be able to move you around, versus going up to the plate and trying to hit a home run and score right off the bat. And for companies that aren't big brands, that don't have, big PR departments, that don't have a ton of resources, I think that it's easier and more sustainable to find your own little niche, your own little blue ocean, for those who like business jargon, basically where you can go win, where you can create a guide on your website, how to purchase this product, so you can build out your product pages so that they are extremely unique, that people, that for your little area of e-commerce, your little area of business, that you can specialize and really own that area by having the best content your users are looking for.
And not to discount the benefit of on-page, obviously I'm going to speak to on-page as it influences your off-page strategies, but I want to create a scenario for you. If my wife and her shopping habits are any indication, there's a lot of search volume and a lot of interest in shoes out there. I hear this Zappos company seems to have done fairly well for themselves over the past 5 to 10 years. And so I want to start a new shoe store. I think there's a lot of money out there. I'm going to say I'm going to open Brett's Shoe Emporium. So I go back home, I sit in my basement, and I start up a WordPress site. I go and I'm going to scrape the entire Zappos site. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to be a little shady. Maybe I'll take some of their product photos. Maybe I'll find a way to get my own. But anyway, I'm going to get all of these different product photos. I'm going to have some writers churn out content for me that talks about the different ways that these different shoes, they match different styles, emerging trends, taking in all the benefits of on-page, not ever having any product or inventory that I can actually sell. And at the end of the day, you can replicate content that exists on other sites without ever having a legitimate brand that needs to substantiate that. And when you talk about off-page, any site can publish content. Not any site can curate links. Brett'sShoeEmporium.com simply will not receive these off-page endorsements and this validation that a site like Zappos is going to secure. And to give a little history lesson here, this is how Google differentiated themselves from the market leaders back in the late 90s. Alta Vista owned the web in the late 90s. Google came in and changed the game because they started to incorporate these off-page factors and realized that if you truly want to be able to have a qualitatively valid ranking of resources, there has to be an understanding of the factors external to that website to be able to determine quality.
All right, before we get into the debate points, I'll just bring up a brief counter. You say that every website can publish content, but not every website can curate links. I will quibble, especially since we're dealing with a mid-level small company. I'll say that not every company, like Zappos, can go out and get links from the New York Times because they're doing a special sale. That not every website can go out and go above and beyond and get these links that actually matter. The days of being able to purchase links or get submitted to thousands of directories are gone. That the links that really matter are so hard to get that going the route of the off page and spending your resources there is going to be a very risky strategy versus the sustainable strategy of on page.
Sure, but to use that same argument, the fact that not everybody can go out there and get these links is exactly why I believe off-page is a stronger aspect of an SEO strategy, because it is something that requires a legitimate value add that resonates with key influencers in that community or in that industry. It's not saying that I make no counter argument to the fact that a site is not going to have the same, link opportunities as a Zappos.com. But Brett's Shoe Emporium, which is one guy with no inventory sitting on the couch in my basement, is not going to be able to curate any links because there's nothing link worthy. There's nothing about that business beyond simply the content posted to the page that validates the fact that this is authentic. I think that the exact point that you made, that not every site can curate links, is exactly why if you are going to invest your resources in off-page or on-page, you are going to see a stronger return by investing those in curating links and doing the hard work to be able to find and create these signals that other people simply can't.
All right. Well, let's get into some specific points to talk about. We both mentioned that the days are gone. I think we're specifically talking about how search engines in general, and Google specifically, has evolved from the days when pretty much any link counted as a good link, or even from the days when Google found out that they should look at links. So let's talk about what is Google looking at, and to a lesser degree, what is Bing looking at when they're trying to judge what sites they should send their organic traffic to.
And I'll kick us off here because I think that the off-page argument is based on, really on the foundation of the web. And I've talked about this before at conferences. I've written about this, but, the web and SEO, in particular, off-page SEO, is all about relationship modeling. The way that you are curating links, you want to curate links from the people who are, legitimate. They provide a legitimate value add and they have an influence in your community. It allows you to validate these on-page initiatives by being able to demonstrate to the search engine the relationships that you have with people that they are already deeming to be authorities in this space. It allows you to piggyback and to leverage that authority to support your own brand. Now, the key distinction here is to almost preempt what I'm sure is going to be one of Nate's counters.
Oh, darn.
But the key distinction here is that off page cannot exist without on page. On page can't exist without off page. You can create solid quality content without having any links pointing to it, and there may be some benefit to it. Now, off page cannot exist without something to link to. There has to be something valuable that people will link to here. But my argument remains that going in and putting in the work to be able to create relationships with highly authoritative resources in your space, understanding where your audience goes to be able to, who are viewed as the experts, who does your audience turn to when they need information, by creating relationships with those sites and then having those relationships translate through the links that are going to point back to your website, allows you to position these relationships in a way that an algorithm can process them, and they can say, not only are you getting the benefit of whatever exists on your own site here, but you're getting the exponential value add that comes from these authoritative resources pointing back and saying, I endorse this website. I, as a website, when I link to somebody, I am willing to send my visitors to that other website. That's how strong I think they are. I am willing to send my people over to them because I think they're going to get the experience that they want. It's going to enhance the way that I am perceived, and it's going to enhance the way that that other site is perceived.
All right, I want defend the fact that if you have content with links, that Google's going to love that content a lot more. But I will call out a caveat, and that is that even though links are by far and away the biggest factor in Google's algorithm, Google is a lot more sophisticated right now. I mean, when it comes to looking just at content with no links. In fact, Moz and BuzzSumo, two industry software leaders, they ran a giant study of several million search results and pieces of content. And they found that 75% of content gets no links and no shares. And even though you might say that, okay, well, that just means 75% of content never gets seen. To me, it tells me that Google has to be really, really good at judging what is good content. Because I would argue that Google is not just going to write off 75% of content on the web and say, okay, this just is not any good because no one's linking to it. No, I think what's happened is that Google has gotten a lot better at understanding search intent and filling search intent when people are, typing in their keywords. So in other words, if someone is typing in a product term, Google isn't just serving up whatever exactly matches that term, black shoes. I think Google is looking at all the other searches. They're looking at what people are clicking through. And if they see that most people who search for black shoes aren't really looking to buy black shoes, they're looking to figure out how to evaluate black shoes, and they're looking for reviews. If you can figure out that search intent and you can provide the best, most quality content, even if you don't have any links, if you can fill that intent, then you're still going to win, and you're still going to be able to push we've talked about the flywheel. You're going to be able to push that flywheel in motion so that maybe once you have more resources, you can come back to investing in off page.
All right. And so let me piggyback on that then. It seems like your argument is predicated largely on the fact that links to we're talking about an individual page,
right,
where we start to have, if a link goes to is a link to a content or is a new piece of content better for, the audience. And I don't think that's the conversation that we should be having here. When we're talking about links, 75% of content is not going to get any links. But that doesn't mean that the resources that are publishing these long tail variations aren't benefiting from having links that are pointing to their homepage, that are pointing to their resources page, that are allowing the search engine to know who is the expert when it comes to these long tail queries. Because especially when you use that long tail argument, a lot of these may be keywords that don't exist yet. If we start to say that tomorrow there's a new argument or there's a new concept in SEO, say we call it, inverted HTXYL, make something completely made up. Now there's not going to be anybody linking to inverted HTXYL, but the people who are going to write about that, who do you think are the ones that are going to rank in that top spot? It's going to be the people who have these validations and these endorsements by way of links and other off-page factors that are validating the domain. I think that's another key distinction that we need to make here, because when I talk about off-page being where you want to invest your resources, it's not a direct cause and effect where I got a link to this page and I got that page to rank. There is more of a one-to-many approach where you can get links to one page and it benefits many other pages on your domain because it enhances the perceived value of your brand for the search engine. And now that lends credibility to the content that you may be writing. It lends authority to you as a subject matter expert in your field, and that these links now are going to, their value of these links extends beyond simply the destination URL, and it actually benefits all, the interconnected, again, going back to that relationship modeling argument, but the whole interconnected nature of the web and your particular website.
Okay, I mean, I'll concede that, but when it comes to investing resources, I think that this is one area where off page that you can get a lot of freebies. I think simply because you're a business, that over time that you're going to accrue a lot of links to your domain just because you exist, because you're getting local listing pages. Different people in your industry are just picking you up. Again, and it might be that kind of flywheel effect where if you can be the first person who, I don't know what was the term that you said, the new concept in SEO?
Oh, the inverted HTXYL?
Yeah. So if you're the first person to write about inverted HTXYL, you're probably going to get a link to that just because you were the first one. It was kind of the first mover's advantage, I think, is a concept that is talked about in marketing, where you, even though you may not end up winning, you get a lot of advantage just for being the first person. And if you can, do that, then you may end up winning. But I think that the thread, the debate point that's kind of that we're moving towards is what of these two approaches is going to bring the quickest ROI. So obviously when we're talking about resources, we're talking about time and we're talking about money. And it can't be something where if we pursue one strategy or another, that eventually one day it will pay off. For a lot of businesses, we need to see a return now at minimum, and at the very latest a couple months. So if we're going to invest this ROI, let's argue about which one is going to be quickest.
Okay, so then let me ask you this. If we're talking only about quickest ROI, would you rather do a PPC campaign or an SEO campaign?
PPC.
Okay. And so if you look at it that way, I make a very similar kind of analogy to what we're talking about here with on-page and off-page, where I can make no argument about quickest ROI for off-page. My opinion, there really isn't one. If we want to talk about quickest ROI, it's pretty definitively the on-page factors that are going to have that quickest return for you. Off-page is almost always going to take longer to generate the ROI, and it's going to be a lot more intangible. We talked about the idea of, the value of links. We're talking very much about these qualitative aspects here. And aside from referral traffic, which we can have a, tangible understanding of how many visits did this linking site drive, it's very difficult to be able to ascertain exactly how much value was passed through from these off-page factors. Now, from a non-purely SEO standpoint, you can make a broader argument here. Links can validate a brand even if it only exists as a splash page or a lander. You can have links that generate traffic when search engines aren't even finding your site. I had traffic to my old company website when it was no indexed and blocked from the search engines because the places that I spoke at, the conferences that I spoke at had links pointing to it, and there was traffic being driven through those links. They help expand the scope of where your content is seen to alternative audiences and communities. They can help you understand what's resonating with your audience that could inform your keyword strategy and your ongoing content marketing. So if we're talking only about quickest ROI, and I know, and I'm jumping ahead here because I've got some of our debate notes, and we'll talk about long-term ROI in a bit. But if we're talking about just quickest ROI, that's your SEO and your PPC argument, where there is no argument for SEO if the only goal is quick ROI. There is no argument for off-page if quick ROI is all you're looking for. But I think when we start talking about one of the long-term and the more sustainable value here, I think that's where we get into a little bit more of an intense conversation.
Well, okay, I agree. If you want quickest ROI, you do PPC. But here's the thing. If you devote resources to off page, you're going to be spending a lot of time, emailing, following up, asking questions, making pitches, and all of that has just a very long lead time. So that there's no way to get into a quick feedback cycle where this is working, this is not working. Whereas with on-page investment, you can do things like target very, very long tail keywords that have very little competition, that you have expertise on, and you control who hits the publish button. So going back to Brett's Shoe Emporium, if you want to have something that sells shoes, you could go and write a post on, how to find the best shoes that will resell on eBay in 2015. And I guarantee you that number one, you're going to be one of the very few writing about that. Number two, that it's actually a legitimate market. And number three, that's the type of content that will not only rank when people are looking for that, but the traffic that you do get is going to be highly qualified, and you may end up getting some sales. And I would argue is going to be more sustainable than a longer approach to off-page SEO, where you may or may not get referral traffic, and then that referral traffic may or may not be qualified.
So let's talk a little bit about the longer term ROI here, because I think that's kind of where we're both leaning towards in terms of where our real arguments lie. And when we talk about this, your argument, if I'm understanding, is that creating this content is going to have the long-term ROI because it becomes this sustainable asset that people are going to find valuable.
That's correct. It's more like we've talked about a flywheel, where a flywheel is it's a machine where it's extremely heavy and hard to get to push. But once you start pushing this wheel, it starts to feed on its own momentum, so that over time it gets easier and easier to push, and the push that you add only adds to the speed that it already has.
Sure. And so kind of taking that a step further, we talked a little bit about, writing for these long tail and these specific contents, and how long it takes for the outreach and all the emails you're going to send, the phone calls that you're going to make before you see any legitimate return from your off page. And this is really where, and we've been very conscious about talking about off-page factors and not talking about link building. We've alluded to links. We're almost we get into bad habits like that. Like we talk about Google as opposed to search engines. Yahoo and Bing, we still matter, guys. You got to talk about us as well. We want to look beyond the links and talk about the relationships that are generated as a result of that outreach. You're starting to now being able to establish yourself among the thought leaders in your space. Links are a product of strong relationships. Links from high quality sources are indicative of highly influential relationships. Now, I'm sure you're going to talk about evergreen content, and I have, again, very little counter argument to the idea of evergreen content, but I would argue that evergreen relationships are significantly more valuable, and they will provide disproportional returns with regards to your marketing strategy, because you can evolve your relationships and you can evolve the SEO signals or trust signals that are passed through these links and other sources as a result of these long-term relationships. And they're ones that, again, you are now in front of a larger audience. You're in front of somebody else's audience. The scope of your content and your brand is exceptionally large as a result of, curating and investing the time to be able to build these strong relationships. It comes down to reputation. It comes down to, again, a lot of these intangible factors that are very difficult to associate with ROI, but you talk about the sustainable benefit in terms of how you want to market your business or your product or service. For me, the best way that you can do that is to make sure that your business, your product or service is ingrained among the, in the mentality of the key influencers in your space.
Okay. And just so I'm hearing your argument is basically that by developing relationships, let's say that you can get to know the top YouTuber on shoes, if we're doing for Brett's Shoe Emporium, or you can get to know the top writer at Consumer Reports, or whoever is doing these reviews on shoes, that the relationships that you develop early on, they're going to provide that same sort of flywheel, evergreen approach for years and years to come, that eventually that even an on-page approach won't be able to touch.
Correct. And I think what it also lets you do is it also, and again, we said it from the very beginning. I don't think either of us take the argument that on-page, or, for me, I don't make the argument that on-page isn't valuable. I don't think that you take the stance that off-page isn't valuable. I think what we're talking about here is, where do you allocate your resources? And I think that when we talk about these relationships and these kind of evergreen, these evergreen associations that we have with key influencers, we're now able to not produce necessarily all the content to be viewed as a thought leader. We have invested the time in being able to build up the relationship, and then we get to reap the returns of that without having to create additional content for every single opportunity. We are able to use our reputation among the thought leaders in the space, and through the links that we're able to drive, to be able to expand the scope of how we're going to position ourselves in our market.
Right. And again, just to reiterate, I'm not saying that's not valid, because in the end, we both pretty much agree on this. But I think that does bring up the main argument for investing in on-page, because, you talk about developing these relationships and whatnot. And I think the key distinction there is that that's not something that you can fully control. Whereas investing resources in on-page is something that you can control. You can hit the publish button. You can revise your content. You can test things on your website. And so for me, I think it comes down to a tolerance for risk, and really being able to factor that into the resources that you're spending. If you're good at emailing, and you're the type of person who can go out and find and market to these relationships that are not part of your organization, that may be right. And I think that's going to pay off. But I think that the key thing is to factor in risk. And, are you actually going to be able to do that? Are you going to actually execute on that? Or are you the type of owner who feels more comfortable and has more expertise, honestly, in investing in better and better content that you own and that you can control?
I think that's a fascinating perspective, honestly. And I think that really makes me question kind of the stance that I've been taking, because I will admit to my own kind of blinders here, where I was considering or thinking about it. And we iterate and we update our content, but you can fall into this mindset where once content's up, it's up. It's like sending a text message. You can't get it back once you've hit the send button. And that's not the case. And I think that's really a key point to your argument, Nate, that when we talk about building on content and the benefits of kind of this on-page approach, is that it is not a static process. It is something that can evolve, similar to the way that your relationships can evolve, similar to how you can kind of stay in front of trends by updating your high-performing content. I think that's really a pretty phenomenal way to argue for the benefit of on-page, if you take that stance. And I think for anybody kind of considering whether to invest more heavily in on-page or off-page, that's going to be the key to either aspect, honestly, is your ability to not simply follow or walk the path here, but to be able to say, all right, understand that you are going to come to a fork in the road constantly. And that doesn't necessarily mean you always have to move forward. You get to a fork in the road that has two bad options, backtrack a couple of steps, tweak your content, and put yourself in a position to be presented with a better fork in the road. And I tip my hat to you. I think that's a really great way to position on-page, because it takes it out of this perspective that once it's up, and you're just, win, lose, or draw, it is what it is.
No, and I think that's true. And I think that last point kind of brings us to our last planned debate point, was disadvantages. How hard is it for each of these approaches to overcome the inherent disadvantages in each? And I think, just as you mentioned, the biggest hurdle for on-page is going to be time and resources. Writing is hard. Creating images are even harder. And video, that's, often professional land for most people. But I think my thing about on-page is that you can plan around that. There's so many options that you can choose what to specialize in. And there's plenty of resources out there. I think we've done an entire podcast on content, or a podcast series on content, that you won't get stuck in the rut of just running a mindless company blog. In fact, I know a business here in Atlanta that they didn't think of themselves as content marketers. They thought of themselves as a restaurant with a small e-commerce store. And they basically took a bunch of their frequently asked questions on how to choose and evaluate one of the products that they kind of sold in their shop and posted it. And that one post has taken them from being a local operation to shipping this stuff nationally. And again, that mainly came down to just them carving out time to invest in their future business. And I think that's the main hurdle. But I guess you could say that's the main hurdle for off page too.
Right. And I think there's no argument that building links is hard, and building links in a boring industry is really hard. And talking about limited time, limited resources, I haven't tried to defend that. I think that's something that I actually think that people considering, where to invest their resources need to be conscious of the fact that if you are going to invest in off-page, this is your SEO versus PPC analogy again, where you are investing in long-term sustainable benefits of these relationships that are going to be able to add value again and again as the algorithm evolves, as your audience needs and behavior evolves, and as your product or service evolves. You talk about specifically looking at it from SEO. Link strategies can die. Right now, if you tell somebody that you want to do directory link building, they're going to laugh in your face. But 10 years ago, that was the innovative strategy. Being able to be involved in the best of the web directory or getting DMOZ listing was like the best possible link you can get. You talk about these other strategies that SEOs have killed. Infographics, again, everybody talks about an infographic linking strategy now, being like, oh, that's so terrible. It's just a bad idea. But it wasn't when it began. It was something that SEOs kind of beat to death. Scholarships is probably the biggest one in more recent memory, where I remember doing scholarships 4, 5, 6 years ago when it was, hey, we would call these schools and be like, wow, nobody has ever come up to us and told us about this. It's amazing you guys are doing this national scholarship and reaching out to us this way. Absolutely, we would love to link to you. And then it starts to make its round on the industry blogs. People start to talk about it at conferences. People start to give tips. People start to just share their complete list of schools, and it gets beaten to death. And all of a sudden, those link signals are not as valuable as they were previously. And all the time that you've invested in these off-page strategies now becomes something that is not really adding significant value to you. We haven't even talked about, these negative strategies here. And I think one of the big issues to me, and one that I think that Google is claiming that they've solved, but I've seen no concrete evidence that they've really solved this problem. And that has to come with negative SEO, where people say, all right, well, I know that buying links is bad for it. I'm going to buy links to driverweb.com, or I'm going to go out there and do some of these spammy link building practices. And I think they've gotten better at it, but who's to say that, I think that's why they're trying to look at this as not as penalties, but rather as these just simply aren't going to count, now that Penguin is rolled around. But the fact that things are changing so much, it would almost be like investing in an IRA only to find out in 30 years that the tax implications of the Roth versus simple IRA you invested in are completely different. And I think that's extremely intimidating for people considering investing in this type of approach, because links aren't going away. At the end of the day, links are still going to be a part of the algorithm, because Google still needs to look at external factors to be able to validate what somebody's saying on the page. But they are evolving. How many people get their information from blogs these days versus social streams? How many people actually read news posts, or they just look for the 140 character snippets? We laugh about it, but that's kind of the reality of our soundbite world that we live in. These social signals are the ones that are going to start to carry weight, because it doesn't really fall into a on-page or an off-page. It's almost this third option where you have this mid-page where you still own it. It's still but its own independent stream. The behavior of the web is changing, and Google's link algorithm, quite frankly, I think is struggling to keep up with it. And I think that's a huge factor to consider when looking at off-page, in terms of how are these links going to be valued in a year, or in 3 years, or in 5 years. We talked again about there is no short-term ROI or limited short-term ROI in link building. You're going for this long-term play, the sustainable approach. Now, what's going to happen if you invest all of your time and resources into a sustainable approach and then the rules change?
Yeah, well, I think that's where it's key with framing it as developing relationships. So you're even though we want links and off page is right now always going to be about links, if you can develop the relationships, those are going to carry across social signals, these other pages or whatever Google comes up with in the future to get those third party endorsements of what you're trying to do on your website.
Right. And the behavior of the web is changing, and the advantage to off page is really the foundation of marketing. The tactics may change, the individual signals may change, but the strategy and the reason that these off page signals are viewed as authoritative endorsements is going to remain as long as people are going to go to search engines and these other really what we'll call aggregators of information to be able to find the resources that they need. So to kind of sum all this up, Nate and I have obviously taken deliberately polarizing positions on page versus off page, but not to sound cliche, but these are two sides to the same brain. These are very symbiotic processes. And again, off page cannot exist without on page. Good on page is going to naturally create links. And so you get into this chicken and the egg argument where did the content that drove the links improve the the traffic and conversions, or did the links get people to view more content and that drove more traffic and conversions? Off page and on page are not mutually exclusive. They are actually quite the opposite. They are mutually dependent on one another to be able to show this absurdly sophisticated algorithm what you offer in terms of a value add to your audience, what type of problems that your product or service is designed to solve, and then putting yourself in a position to be able to reach people who are looking to solve those problems. Both on page and off page can inform the overall strategy. And to go back to one of my favorite phrases that I know I've used here on the podcast before, but in high tide, all ships rise.
All right. Well, you can find previous episodes, links to things that we mentioned, and our contact information at bamboochalupa.com. If you don't want to miss another episode, go subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. And this is key. I say it every week, but I really want to emphasize it. Please leave a comment and rating while you are logged into your podcast app. Not only do me and Brett learn a lot from your feedback, but those ratings and reviews helps others to discover the show and helps keep this whole project going along. And so we'd really appreciate it if you go leave a rating and review, subscribe. But for Brett Snyder, I'm Nate Shiver. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.